Welcome to Inside Racing. I'm at Sydney's Star City Casino and I have an appointment with a truly remarkable man who has walked on the sunny side of the street for most of his life. Renowned author Dick Francis has lived to the full every day of his 81 years, relentlessly pursuing his dreams and realising most of them. He served with distinction in the Royal Air Force during World War II, and after the war rose to great prominence in the world of British national hunt racing. He rode 350 winners, he was champion jockey in 53, 54, and was retained for 4 seasons by none other than the Queen Mother. His recollections of that famous Grand National of 1956 will fascinate you, and so will the footage of an unforgettable event. Dick Francis is currently in Australia promoting his 41st book, and I'm about to introduce you to a man whose books have sold more than 70 million copies around the world. For years and years I've been under the impression that you were a Pom. To my total surprise, I learn you're a Taffy.
Yes.
You're a Welshman.
Yes, I'm a Welshman. And as a child, I used to go back to Wales a lot and to my grandfather's farm. That's where I started to ride on donkeys, really. My brother and I was a professional jockey from the time I was about 4, because my brother bet me a shilling it was, that I wouldn't sit on the donkey facing the tail and he would chase it over a jump. I fell off 6 times, but I won my shilling in the end.
So that was your first professional appearance as a jockey.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, you graduated to ponies soon after.
Yes, and my father, he used to be a jockey before the First World War, but he didn't go back to racing after the war, and he went into the horse dealing business, and he had a big stable, and I was riding all sorts of ponies and horses right from the time I was no height. I always wanted to be a jockey, a steeplechase jockey, but mother and father weren't very keen that I should be. He knew the trials and tribulations of what a jockey's life was like. You
were coming up 20 years of age when you joined the Royal Air Force, but it was a long time before you got to fly an aeroplane.
Yes, I had 3 years in the Royal Air Force, 1 year in England, and then I was sent out to the Middle East. We had to go right round South Africa and up the Suez, and I had 2 years in the Middle East, sort of chasing the 8th Army up and coming back when they were retreated. And I kept putting in applications to my commanding officer to go flying.
Now, I believe you put in a total of 37 applications.
Well, it was around that figure, yeah.
Yeah, how frustrating.
And the one of the last times I put, well, it wasn't the last time, but one time I put my applications in, and it was a new squadron leader. He said, "Well, Francis, I hear you want to go flying." I said, "Yes, please, sir." He said, "What sports are you interested in?" I said, "Hunting, shooting and fishing, sir." "Get out of here, I don't want any cheek from you." So that was, my entry into flying was delayed. But eventually one of my commanding officers did go along with my thoughts, and I was sent down to Rhodesia, which is now Zimbabwe, and I did my flying training down there. I went back from there as a pilot officer. I'd been trained on fighters. I went back to England. I was flying Spitfires, but it was at the time of the war when the fighters weren't used nearly as much as they had been during the Battle of Britain, and they were short of bomber pilots, so they took me as a guinea pig. They took me as a pilot officer, and they took a sergeant pilot as well, and put us straight on to Wellingtons to see how we could get on from flying Spitfires to Wellingtons. I got through all right. I don't know what happened to the sergeant pilot. He went somewhere else. And eventually it was like getting out of an MGB GT car into a truck to get out of a Spitfire into an old Wellington. Yeah. But I got through all right.
Now, you were flying a Wellington on one occasion when you had a chilling moment. In fact, you tell me the only really terrifying moment during your flying days in World War II.
You had lots of anti-aircraft shells bursting around you, but I tried to keep just above the height of those. But I did. My observer was up in his dome on top of the plane. He's, "Governor," he said, "there's ME Messerschmitt on our tail." So fortunately, we were very near a cloud, and I did some avoiding action and dived into the cloud. Never saw him again. But it was a nasty moment for a few minutes.
Did you get the same exhilaration flying a Spitfire or a Wellington or a Lancaster as you did riding a bull-striding steeplechaser?
No. There is nothing more enjoyable than riding a really good steeplechaser. When I went into, when I became a professional, because I started off as an amateur, but the stewards thought I was taking the bread and butter out of the amateurs, out of the professionals' mouths, because I was riding so many horses. There were only, in 1948, there were only 3 professional jockeys who'd had more rides than me that season, and I wasn't getting paid for it. So they said, "You must turn professional." So when I turned professional, I was offered a very good job of riding for Lord Bister, who had a very powerful team of horses: Silver Fame, Roymond, Faneur, Freddie Fox, terrific horses. And there's nothing more pleasing but to ride a horse like that and getting the others behind you and say, "Come on, follow me, you devils."
Yeah, sure. There's a racetrack in northern Wales at a place called Bangor-on-Dee.
Bangor-on-Dee, yes.
Does that ring a bell to you?
I had my first ride there when I went into racing. I was still an amateur, and it was some time before I could break my duck and ride a winner. But in spring 1948, I think it was, I had 2 winners there one day, and then the following year I had 3 winners. It was a terrific track for me.
Yeah.
I loved it.
Now, right throughout your career as a jumps jockey, you were extremely well known for walking the course, something that not all jockeys did, but you would never go to a strange track without familiarising yourself with the layout.
Oh, it was definitely, you must do that, see, because you get to know the lie of the land. Whether if there, say there are 16 fences in a 2-mile steeplechase, and if you can gain a length at every one by jumping it properly, that's 16 lengths you've got to make up from the rest of them have got to make up to catch you. It's much the best thing to do.
All part of the professional package.
Oh, most definitely.
Now, Dick, in 1953, you were paid the supreme compliment by Her Majesty the Queen Mother when you were retained as her jumps jockey, and at that time she had a fairly strong stable of jumpers.
Yes, she did. Mm-hmm.
This is surely the hallmark of the integrity of any rider.
Well, it was a great honour. It was much, and
how was the approach made?
Well, her trainer, Peter Caslett, he approached me one day at Sandown Park. I suppose I had ridden a horse for him in an earlier race, and I suppose he thought, well, I'd done all right. And he was looking for another jockey because his other one was retiring. And he approached me at Sandown Park one day and he said, "Dick, will you accept a retainer to be my first jockey?" Well, I said, it's a great honour, I said, but I can't really accept a first retainer from you because Lord Bister, I've been riding for him for some years, and he's a wonderful man. I can't say no to him and yes to you. "Oh, no," he said, "that's all right. We know Lord Bister's getting an old man, and he won't be going on for long. And if you're going to ride one for him and I run one in the same race, I'll get another jockey. But," he said, "I'd like to have you as my first jockey if you're available." So this was early on in the season. Before the end of the season, Lord Bister died, unfortunately, an old man. And so I was first jockey to Peter Caslett's stable from then on. And I remember before I had one ride for him, he came into the weighing room at Newton Abbot. It was the first meeting of the season. He sat down beside me. He said, "Dick," he said, "I hope this is going to be a successful association." He said, "I want you to remember two things. First is," he said, "every horse you ride for me is doing its best. You're not going out to give it a run round or anything. And the second thing is you'll never look round during the closing stages of a race." He said, "Of course," he said, "you need to look round sometime when you're out in the country, see how the opponents are going." Well, I tried to remember this all the time. And one day at Lingfield Park, I was riding the first of the number of fancied rides I rode for the Queen Mother, a horse called Martha Vu. And we were all in the parade ring beforehand. The Queen Mother was there, and Peter Cass. He said, "Dick," he said, "I think you'll win this race." He said, "Give him a nice ride," and he said, "As you jump the last, make the best of your way home." Well, I did this. I had a great ride, and as I jumped the last, I rode out for the winning post. I didn't have to pick up my stick because I knew I was winning quite easily. And halfway up the straight, I could hear this tremendous cheering or shouting going on. I thought, "My God, I'm being tackled." And I daren't look round. I sat down and rode hard for the winning post. When I got past the winning post, I could look round then. There was nothing within any distance of me. It was one of Her Majesty's early winners. And, very popular she was.
Dick Francis rode the Queen Mother's horse Devonlock in the 1956 Grand National at Aintree. After the break, you'll see why this Grand National is still talked about almost half a century later.
The going is good and the pace is fast, and it's far too soon to draw any conclusions. But Amorial, Damata and Sundew are out in front. About 250,000 people at Aintree. That proves the popularity of the National. This year, Her Majesty the Queen graced the occasion by her presence, accompanied by the Queen Mother and Princess Margaret. Desperate last-minute signalling by the bookies' tic-tac men can now be witnessed, for it's nearly time for the start of the greatest steeplechase in the world, and all the thrills that inevitably go with it. There's no draw for places in the National, and after temperamental runners have been got into line, the starter sends them away. It's a field of 29, and we travel with them on the gallop to the first jump, one of the most crucial in the whole race. Memorial 3 and Damata are first over, but 4 come to grief. They're early missed, High Guard, the only grey, Must and Reverend Prince. The going is good and the pace is fast, and it's far too soon to draw any conclusions. But Amorial, Damata and Sundew are out in front. Amorial leads over the 12th. This one proved too much for Athenian. Into the country now for the start of the second round, with Amorial still going beautifully. Amorial is still showing his heels to the field, but now Devonlock is after him. Yes, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother's well-fancied Devonlock came into the picture at this stage and jumped the canal turn second with Eagle Lodge. Over the 26th jump, and Amorial is down, Amorial is out of it, and the way is definitely clear for Devonlock to take command from now on. It's Devonlock, Eagle Lodge and ESB. Eagle Lodge takes the 29th, just ahead of Devonlock, but there's nothing in it. Entree loses his jockey here. But there's only one thought among the spectators: will Devonlock win? He leads over the last fence, and he gallops on strongly towards an almost certain triumph. The excitement was terrific. But now the newsreel camera captures for you the greatest sensation of all. The incredible has happened, and only 50 yards from the post. The crowd is stunned as ESB goes on to win. An appalling moment for Devonlock's jockey, Dick Francis. Bitterly disappointed as she must have been, the Queen Mother is reported as saying simply, "That's racing."
But I've looked at this newsreel time and time again. It was before the race was televised, and just as we're approaching the water jump, you see Devon Lock prick his ears, so I was here last time round. A sign of recognition. As he pricked his ears, this crescendo hit him. God, his hindquarters just refused to act. He went down on his belly and slid along the ground with his 4 feet out in front of him and his hind feet behind. How I didn't fall off him, I don't know, but he got to his feet. If I could have got him going then, I was so far enough in front to have won. But he pulled all the muscles on his hindquarters and he more or less collapsed again. And I had to get off and walk away in disgust.
There have been many theories about the reason for that unique fall.
Oh,
I've never seen a horse fall in quite the same way. It was a belly flop.
Absolutely.
One theory was that he, as you said, tried to jump the imaginary water jump.
No, you can
the
tell
ghost
where the
jump,
horse
as
is
they
going to
called it.
jump. You can feel him get his legs under you and take off. But
So what do you really feel was the reason for his fall?
I think it was the shock of the noise. It was
The roar of the crowd.
The roar of the crowd. And it just wasn't to be a royal winner that day. That was probably, if that hadn't happened, I won the race, perhaps my author's agent might not have got an introduction to me and got me to write my autobiography.
Yeah.
I might never have written a book if
That may well be, Dick, but to have a Grand National win in your
Snatched
scrapbook
from
would
you.
also have been a wonderful moment. Now that is 45 years ago.
That's 1956. Is that 45 years ago?
Yes. Now,
Yeah.
are there still days when you're at home in the Cayman Islands that you reflect on that race and say to yourself out loud, why did he have to fall that day? Are you still frustrated by it?
Oh, I am. Yes, I am. I would love to ride in it again and have another opportunity. I rode Devon Lock a number of times afterwards.
So he's fully recovered?
He'd fully recovered. He ran in a hurdle race at Nottingham about 6 months after this, and he was only going for a run round, but Peter Caslett's horses were always win if you could, and a mile out he took up a bit and he won easily by 10 lengths. I had a terrific reception, and I won a couple more races on him, steeplechases, and in January 1957 he ran in the big race at Sandown Park, the Mildmay Memorial, and Arthur Freeman rode him because I was laid up. I'd had a fall just previously and recovering, and he broke down. His tendon went in this particular race, and he was never any good after that. The Queen Mother very kindly gave him to Bruce Hobbs, who was assistant trainer to Boyd Rochford at that time, and he used him on the Newmarket Heath for teaching the two-year-olds there how to canter and gallop.
I've always believed the bravest of all men were the pioneer aviators and jumps jockeys. Now, I can't imagine there'd be a jumps jockey alive who doesn't consciously think, as he goes out for a race, I wonder if I'll get back unscathed.
No, you're wrong.
Did you ever think that way?
You never think that.
No.
You always think you're going out to win. And I rode a horse for Lord Bister in one Grand National, a horse called Senlac Hill. He'd given me some terrible falls because he couldn't judge the pace or judge the distance from a fence. He used to gallop into the open ditches and turn over. But I managed to win a couple of races on him at Lingfield to qualify him. He won races valuable enough to run in the National, and then they were going to run him in this Grand National. I thought, well, I shall never get past the first open ditch, was the third fence, and he got over that. He rattled it like mad, and all 4.5 miles he rattled everything. And only 5 horses finished in this Grand National, and he was number 5. But I was cantering in, completing my course, And Raymond Glendenning, who was doing the racecourse commentary, he said, "Oh, here's Senlac Hill coming up. He must have fallen and he's just cantering in." But I was completing, a long way behind, but I completed the course.
Increasing his lead, Early Mist was followed by Mont Tremblant, Irish Lizard, Overshadow, the Grey, and Senlac Hill, the only others to finish the course. Happy triumph for his owner, Mr. Griffin, his trainer, Mr. O'Brien, and, of course, his jockey. It was certainly a thrilling moment for all concerned, and to judge by the picture, quite a number of people were. I can only hope Early Mist himself appreciated the great ovation he rightly received. Too soon yet for anyone to guess the winner, especially in view of what happened at the canal turn. Here there was a very grim pile-up, accounting for Herber, Parasol II, and Whispering Steel.
Most flat jockeys can reel off their list of injuries from memory. I imagine jumps jockeys would need to write them down. They're so numerous.
Yeah.
Did you have any really serious injuries?
My worst injury, I crushed some vertebrae in my back just before I went to America to ride in the international steeplechase at Belmont Park. And I was lying on the floor at the Beaufort Hunt meeting where this happened. The fall was all right, but another horse fell on top of me and crushed my vertebrae. And I could see the trip to America going in 2 weeks' time very much. But fortunately, I went to see the specialist in London, Bill Tucker. He fitted me up with a brace and put me in plaster for a few days then. And that was my worst injury. I broke my nose 5 times. I broke my collarbones 6 times each side. Fractured my skull a couple of times, but nothing's prevented me from walking about.
No. But Dick, do you carry any of the legacies of these injuries to this day at 81 years of age?
Yes,
you must have a few
that
aches and
finger
pains.
won't bend. I can bend it, but as soon as I leave it go, it sticks. That's the only injury.
Yeah.
I have a recurring dislocation shoulder, which I have to be very careful of. Every night when I go to bed, I strap it down with a bandage around me.
Yeah. You're not bitter about any of these things?
Not a bit, no.
You'd do it all again?
Yeah, I'd love another go at the Grand National.
You rode in 8 Grand Nationals altogether, completed the course 3 times. Now, we hear about these legendary obstacles, the Chair, Valentine's, Beecher's Brook. Which is the most intimidating?
Oh, the Chair is the most intimidating. It's right in front of the stands, and it is more intimidating because it's rather narrow. Out in the country, the whole fences are right across the course. But if you're really swinging into it and get your horse to take off and go as far the other, I rode some terrific jumpers at Aintree. I rode a horse called Possible for the Duchess of Norfolk, fabulous jumper. And he'd take off outside of the wings and land just as far the other side. There's nothing more thrilling than to jump a big fence like that on a great jumper.
Yeah. Dick, I read that you still have the occasional dream that you're riding in the National. And one of the dreams, a recurring dream, has been the ride on Devon Lock.
Yes. It was only about 2 or 3 years ago I dreamt I won the race. And the next time I saw Her Majesty, the Queen Mother, I told her about this. She said, "Oh, I wish it had been."
Yeah.
But whenever we see each other, and see her quite often, she always brings up, and we talk about the Grand National 1956.
Allow me to remind you of a lovely quote attributed to you about steeplechase jockeys. Although it may seem that steeplechase jockeys are recklessly risking their lives in a dangerous sport, it is a matter of record that the death rate of window cleaners is very much higher. If any window cleaners' wives happen to be reading this, I sincerely apologise for passing on this most unwelcome piece of news.
Is that in my autobiography, or is it in one of the novels? I know, I remember writing it.
Yeah. It's very good.
Well, their death toll is very high, winter cleaners.
In part 2 of the Dick Francis story, the famous author recalls the fall that ended his racing days and the job that launched his writing career.
But I'd also been offered a job of writing for the Sunday Express. The editor said, would I write half a dozen articles for his newspaper? Those half a dozen articles went on to 16 years.
Dick talks of the book he really didn't have time to write, but somehow met the deadline on the Lester Piggott biography.
So I finished Break in May, went into the publishers, and instead of having a break, a holiday, I went straight into doing the Lester Piggott.
He talks of the endless hours of work in every book.
But the first page, and the first paragraph especially, takes me a long, long time. You've got to grab your audience on page 1.
He bristles as he refutes the suggestion that his late wife Mary was the author of his books.
I was furious. If he walked in that door now, although I'm 71, I'd go over and give him a bloody good hiding.
Last time, Dick Francis talked about his childhood in Wales and his days as a fighter and bomber pilot in the Royal Air Force.
They were short of bomber pilots, so they took me as a guinea pig. They took me as a pilot officer, and they took a sergeant pilot as well, and put us straight on to Wellingtons to see how we could get on from flying Spitfires to Wellingtons.
Dick reflected on his 10 years as a professional jumps jockey and the Grand National that got away.
And just as we're approaching the water jump, you see Devon Lock prick his ears. So I was here last time round, a sign of recognition. As he pricked his ears, this crescendo hit him. God, his hindquarters just refused to act. He went down on his belly and slid along the ground with his 4 feet out in front of him.
The famous author proudly catalogued the numerous injuries he suffered as a jumps jockey.
I broke my nose 5 times. I broke my collarbones 6 times each side, fractured my skull a couple of times, but nothing's prevented me from walking about.
Dick begins part 2 of our story with his recollection of the injury that ended his riding career.
I was riding this horse at a race at Newbury, and he fell with me and hurt my back and my spleen. But it wasn't earth-shattering. I recovered from it all right, but I was advised by Lord Abergavenny, who was the Queen Mother's racing advisor, and I went to see him during my recovery time. He said, if I were you, Dick, I'd get out now while you're at the top. I was leading the jockey's table at the time. He said, you'll get all sorts of things offered you. And I, funnily enough, thought about it for the weekend and talked to Mary about it. And on the Tuesday, they used to have a program on television called Sports View. And I got hold of the producer and I said, if you let me come on, I've got something unusual to tell you. So I went on and I announced my retirement on it. Of course, all the media wanted interviews. What are you going to do, Dick? Are you going to train? I said, no, that's far too worrying. People won't pay and things like that. Had you got a job as a starter? I said I had been offered a job as a starter, but I'd also been offered a job of writing for the Sunday Express. The editor said, would I write half a dozen articles for his newspaper? Those half a dozen articles went on to 16 years.
16 years as a racing correspondent. Yeah. But during this period, of course, you wrote your autobiography, entitled The Sport of Queens.
Yes. I asked Her Majesty's private secretary, Sir Martin Gilliot, I said, do you think Her Majesty will mind me calling it that? And he said he would inquire, and he called me and said, Her Majesty would be delighted if you called it that. And it was based on the first bit, wasn't all chapter 1. The first bit was about the Devon Locker episode, and then I told my life story afterwards.
Now, what inspired you to make the switch from writing racing for a newspaper to writing fiction?
Well, in 1957, my autobiography was published, and it did very well. It came out early in December, but they had to reprint before Christmas. And then but before this, the editor of the Sunday Express had asked me to write articles, and in 1962, about 4 years later, Mary said to me, she said, "You always said you were going to write a novel." She said, "Now's the time. We've got 2 sons to educate, and the cars are beginning to knock, and the carpets are wearing out." So I sat down and wrote Dead Cert, and it was in the contract that I had with Michael Joseph for my autobiography that if I wrote anything else, they must have first refusal. So my author's agent, took the manuscript of Dead Cert to Michael Joseph, and they published it straight away. And I should have written another one while they were preparing this, but I wouldn't write another until I saw how that had done. So there wasn't one in 1963, and then in 1964 I'd written Nerve. That was published, and in 1965 the publisher said, "We want 2 from you this year. We want to get you on the Christmas sale list." I said, "I can't do that. I'm writing for the newspaper and I'm writing the 1 novel a year." "Oh yes, you can. You do it." So I did 2 in 1965, and there's been 1 every year ever since.
Yeah, you never took on 2 in 1 year after that.
Well, I did take on 2 in 1985 because I'd been doing the Lester Piggott research he wanted me to write his biography. I'd been doing that for about 14 years. In the beginning of 1965, he telephoned. He said, "Dick, I'm giving up in November this year. I'd like my biography out as soon as afterwards as possible." Well, I said, "Lester, you'll have to wait for a while because I've already started Break-In, and I'm going to finish that first." He said, "Well, it's okay as long as mine comes out fairly soon after I give up in November." So I finished Break-In in May. It went into the publishers, and instead of having a break or holiday, I went straight into doing the Lester Piggott thing. I'd done a lot of research and facts and figures, and it went, anyhow, his story went to the printers on December the 31st that year, and on January the 1st is when I start my research and writing the next novel, and I hadn't done any research for the new novel, so I used Kit Fielding and Princess Cecilia and Danielle, who'd appeared in Break-In. I used them again in Bolt, and that did well too, so I can't complain.
Lester Piggott has been described by many aficionados as possibly the greatest jockey in the history of professional racing.
Yes, he and Fred Archer and Gordon Richards, but Lester he was big, and he was a genius on horseback. Matter of fact, he was at the Melbourne Cup on Tuesday. I saw him there.
Is he the best jockey you've seen?
Oh, definitely, yes. He rode over hurdles for a couple of years before his job with Noel Merlis started, and I beat him a neck at Sandown over hurdles one day, and I thought, well, I'm doing all right if I can beat Lester a neck.
Yeah. It has been said that he was an extremely impudent and cheeky lad.
He would
as a
pin
junior
someone's
jockey.
stick if he dropped his own. And his trouble is he can't talk, you see. He has a great plum in his mouth and he doesn't hear what you're saying. He's got to be looking at you to read your lips. And I'd done a few years of doing his work, and I said during 1985 when I was bringing his story, which was called Lester, bring it to a head, well, I said, Lester, of all your Derby winners, there were 9 in the end, I said, I know you liked Saraiva better than any of them, your second Derby winner. I said, tell me all about him. So Lester thought for about 5 minutes, nice horse. He said, I had to make a story of that, you see.
That's all he offered. Nice
horse.
Yeah.
But he was a genius on horseback.
Had he been spoiled and pampered from a very early age? Was he
yes.
too used to having his own way?
He had, I think, because his father, for years, I did a lot of research with him. He had films of all Leicester's races, all his big races, and he was thrilled with the ground that Leicester walked on. He was spoiled, but...
Are you saying he had an ego problem, Dick? Did Lester Piggott have an ego?
No, I don't think he did have an ego problem. But he knew he was good, but I said to him at Flemington on Tuesday, I said, one of my greatest thrills was beating you a neck at Sandown one day. I remember the horse I was riding, a horse called Deal Park, but he said, I don't remember that.
Yeah.
He wouldn't remember being beaten anyhow.
Look at Zadok go, down to the 200. Zadok the leader, a length and a half in front. Ravada on the inside is trying hard, and further back then Vigil, but it's Zadok in front near the line. Ravada's trying hard, but Lester Piggott and Zadok. Zadok wins the Black Oval. Zadok first, Ravada second.
Racing provided the theme for many of your books, but not all. Now, were there occasions you deliberately stayed away from racing?
I didn't stay away from it at all in any of them. I know Trial Run was chiefly about 3-day eventing, equestrian world. Mrs. Michael Joseph thought it would be a good idea if I went to Moscow and did some research before the Olympics opened there. And although the main character, what was his name? I've forgotten now, but was a 3-day eventer, he had started life as an amateur steeplechase jockey, but it was just at that time that the Jockey Club brought in a rule that jockeys couldn't wear glasses, whether they were amateur or professional. So this fellow, he couldn't go with the things you put in your eyes, what they call them.
Contact lenses?
Contact lenses. They didn't suit him at all, so in my story. So he took up eventing, that's why. But he had been a steeplechase jockey, and he went into eventing because of the new rule. But there wasn't much steeplechasing, but there was quite a bit of equestrianism.
Horses were ever present.
And they come into all my books, horses, but not as much in the later novels as in the earlier ones, because I was nearer the scene when I wrote my first books.
Your late wife Mary excelled in the research.
Oh, she loved it. She always said to me.
She lived the role too, didn't she?
Yes, she did. She always said to me, if you ever take up deep sea diving, I'm not going to do any research for that for you.
But she learned to fly.
She learned to fly for fly and finish and
Yeah.
rat race, and she became a first-class photographer for Reflex. In fact, she became a professional photographer because at that time, Bill Curlin wrote a book about the Queen's horses, and the Queen Mother's horses, actually. And Michael Joseph, my publisher, had undertaken to publish this book, and they wanted to use an unusual photograph of the Queen Mother. And they didn't want a press photographer photograph. And they asked Mary whether she would take a photograph of Her Majesty. And Mary said, I can't possibly do that, just take a photograph. Oh, they said, we'll get permission. So Martin Gilliatt, he got permission for Mary to take photographs of her. And one day at Newbury Races, Mary was following her around quite a lot, taking photographs, and the Queen Mother was posing for her even at times. And this photograph appeared on the front of this book of Bill Curlin's, and she got paid for it. So she was a professional.
Yeah.
She was a professional photographer too, and she learned a lot about pharmacology for banker. And she and I went to the merchant banks in London, Singer and Friedlanders and Flemings, and they were terrific help to us, the directors of those banks.
A British author, Graham Lord, suggested in a biography that he did on the life of Dick Francis that Mary was in fact the primary author of your books. Now that sort of claim must have rocked your fans to their socks.
Absolutely, but fortunately the book hasn't done very well. He used to work with me on the Sunday Express, and he wrote to me and he said, could he write my biography? And I wrote back, I said, no, Graham, I'd rather you didn't. I said, it's a great honour of you to ask, but I'd rather you didn't. If anyone's going to write my biography, it'll be my son, Felix. And he said, oh, that's okay then. And a couple of years later, I found he was writing this biography. And I was furious. And if he walked in that door now, although I'm 71, I'd go over and give him a bloody good hiding. He was so inaccurate. It was inaccurate all the way through. And he loved the idea. I've got a story. Mary writes the book. Mary, I couldn't have written a book without Mary's help. She corrected all my English, and she did a tremendous lot of research, and we used to discuss what we'd done during the day at night. But and when I wrote my autobiography, Mary read it every word for word, and she said, you've got a split infinitive here and have to change that around.
Yeah. So she had the eye of an eagle.
She had a much better eye for reading than I did.
Once your storyline's established and work begins on a new book, do you find yourself chugging along at a steady rate day by day, or are there times when you bog down?
I've never really got up, other than a day when I've been bogged down. Sometimes you can't just get it going. But the first page, and the first paragraph especially, takes me a long, long time. You've got to grab your audience on page one, because you see people walk into a bookshop and they pick up a Dick Francis book or pick up any book and they go through the pages. And I think if you can grab them on the first page, you can get them for the rest of the book. They have to buy it then.
Are there days when you might be feeling slightly off colour or whatever, that you simply can't face it?
Yes, there are. And I go out and, when I was in lockdown, go out and have a ride around the countryside. But I've never had writers. What do they call it? Writer's cramp or something.
Yeah. You've never had that?
I've never had it, not for more than a day.
Have you ever been known to rip a sheet of paper out of a typewriter, scrunch it up and throw it 20 metres?
Yes. What writer hasn't?
Yeah. Now you say to go for a ride brings you back to earth. How long since you've been on a horse?
Oh, it's 10, 12, 15 years now since I've been on a horse. I was about 65.
Yeah. If we had a nice, quiet old gelding in this room right now, would you be tempted to sit on his back?
Oh, I'd get on him, yes. But my last few years as a jockey, I always had this arm strapped down. And I go to bed with it strapped down as well, because if you roll over at night, my shoulder's inclined to go out. Felix, who just walked in, he's got the same trouble, and my father had the same trouble. And I had mine operated on, and Felix has had his operated on. It's a family complaint.
what is your favourite book? Of all of the Dick Francis novels, do you have a personal favourite?
Oh, my favourite, well, until recently it's always been the last one because it's with you. But I think Forfeit was one I really liked. Tyrone was the main character, and he was a Sunday newspaper man, which I was. And Ty had a wife, Elizabeth, and she was a polio victim. She was in an iron lung for a lot of the time. Spirochelle she used to get about. But Mary my wife was in an iron lung with polio. She was in an iron lung for about 5 weeks. She was pregnant at the time too. It was terrible. But I used to race all over England and go back to her hospital in London every night. And that is very much with me. And it was a good story.
What type of book would you tend to read at night before you doze off? What sort of book would you pick up?
I can't read at night somehow. When I get to bed, my head's on the pillow. But if I'm sitting, before I go to bed, if I'm sitting, I like reading biographies or autobiographies. I think the most enjoyable book I've ever read was Charles Lindbergh's book, The Spirit of St. Louis, where he was flying across the Atlantic, the first solo flight across the Atlantic. Oh, it was a super book. And I've got it at home and I sometimes read it again.
Yeah. An amazing feat in 1927.
27 or 28, wasn't it?
One of those courageous pioneer aviators that I mentioned earlier. As brave as he wasn't as brave as a jumps jockey.
Oh, I don't know. He was because he was dropping off to sleep, and he hadn't slept for hours before he took off. It was an amazing story.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, he had a terrible life when his son was kidnapped.
In an era where sex sells, I think it's a fascinating aspect of your career that you've been able to sell 60 million books around the world without barely a swear word.
No, well, when my sons were at school and I was writing, I didn't want them to be embarrassed what their father had written. And now, of course, I never write anything like that because the Queen Mother would hate those. I went into Clarence's house to a party she gave some years ago, and she got all my books in a glass case. I'd given them all to her, and it was very rewarding to see. She hadn't got as many then as she has now. And I don't want her to read filthy language, because Martin Gillett used to tell me if she was reading the book and there was something in the book that she didn't like, she'd put a red line underneath it. She said she's had one or two words in your book which occasionally has the red line underneath it.
Yeah. But isn't it lovely to think that people of many generations still enjoy good, old-fashioned, wholesome adventure?
It is, yes, it is. It's lovely, it really is. And there's so much tripe written these days, isn't there? And I as you said, there are 60, well, my son, an agent, about 5 years ago, they counted up the books around the world at that time, and it was about 70 million. It must be over that now. And they are published in 34 different languages. Not every one, but it's very, very rewarding to have that behind you.
How many more books, Dick?
No
How
more.
much longer?
No more.
Is this it?
Yeah. Mary and I, about 15 months ago, when Shattered first came out, Shattered first came out as a hardback, and it was very well received. I said, no, we're not going to do any more, are we? And she said, no, all right. She said, I don't feel like doing any more research. And a month after we said that, she died. And I'm not going to do... I'm toying with the idea, I've done a little bit of research, of doing a tribute to her. But that will take a long time, because neither of us neither of us kept diaries, and you have a lot of checking up to do. But I hope I'll finish it one day.
What if a publisher with a lot of money came along and said, Dick, we want a history of the Grand National?
I'd say, go to someone else.
You sure?
Yeah. I've finished, apart from Tribute to Mary, and it won't be a long book, that one.
Do you have a name in mind for that one?
Certainly the reputation of Dick Francis, the author, has eclipsed the memory.
How does Dick Francis want to be remembered? What would you like to see on your epitaph?
Well, it'll be on my epitaph. The chap who didn't win the Grand National, but is probably known a lot better than some of those who did.
Dick, studying your body language and observing your facial expressions when we talk about different topics, it's very clear to me that you gain great delight in reflecting on your literary career, but you absolutely sparkle when you talk about horses and riding jumping horses.
Yes, it was a great life.
It's been the joy of your life, hasn't it?
The unfortunate part of it wasn't so successful as my writing has been. I had a very successful life as a jockey, but you're limited to about 10 years. My writing has covered 40 years more. And, well, I've had a good life anyhow with both of them.
Dick Francis, on behalf of the 70 million people who've been devouring your books for almost 40 years now, thanks for the fun, thanks for the entertainment, and thanks for gracing the human race with such class and dignity. Look forward to your company next time around on Inside Racing when we introduce another famous face. Until then, many winners.